All right, so the big question, is Star Wars The Last Jedi worth seeing in theaters? Now, what about 3D? Or even, is it worth seeing in IMAX? So let's answer those questions now. I actually just got back from seeing it, and so I got a lot to say on this, and this is going to be spoiler free. So this is really just to analyze if it's worth going to pay money to see this movie. So first off, as far as the movie is concerned, I actually think this is a stellar movie. Pun intended, I actually thought it was really good, even though I was still left with quite a bit of plot confusion. But I'm not a hardcore Star Wars geek. I'm looking at the movie just like somebody who, I've seen all the Star Wars movies. I love them. I had the toys as a kid. But that's as far as I've went. I don't know any of these conspiracy theories and huge things that these hardcore guys are really into. But as far as I'm concerned, the movie in general really provided a satisfying Star Wars fix. All right, but the question, is The Last Jedi worth seeing in theaters, or can you wait to see it on Netflix or Blu-ray and save money? Because we know Rogue One came out the same weekend a year ago and has already been on Netflix for a while. So, it may not be too long before this shows up on Netflix. So, here's some criteria that will help you decide. Are you ready? So the first criteria is production value. All right, it looks fantastic, actually. So even during the few silly parts, and yes, there are a couple parts that are a bit silly, you can be distracted by just how visually spectacular it is, right? I was actually very impressed. But what really goes in the plus column for spending the theater money is the sound. All right, the sound design is amazing. And that's the first thing I noticed. The dialogue is crisp and mostly in the high range, like the really high range. And the sound effects rumble in the low range. They're very separate, and the score and the music settle around the mid-range. For those of you who aren't musicians, all you really need to know is that it's spread about and separated all the different elements where it sounds great. The whole thing put together is sonically moving, if that makes sense. What I mean is the music and the sounds of this movie will actually drive you emotionally. Perhaps more so than the visuals or even the plot. All right, so that's a plus in seeing it in a big theater to actually experience the sound effects and the music. And I don't say that too often. That's not the case with a lot of movies, or most movies, right? It's a really good job, sound effect and musically wise, where it's impressive. Like I said, the music will be able to move you emotionally. All right, so should you see Star Wars The Last Jedi in 3D? All right, so they did do a great job in the 3D effects. However, only a couple things actually jumped out of the screen. So there were, however, some really good, what I call diorama effects, in which there was noticeable depth onto the screen. I call it diorama effect. I don't know if you guys had to build this when you were a kid in school, where you take like a shoebox and you put like action figures in it and you build something out. So anyways, what I mean is there's depth that goes into the screen, not out at you. That's what I call a diorama effect, all right? And I took my glasses off at one point, and the loss of 3D was not that noticeable at all, right? But but if you're spending the money at the theater anyway, 3D is worth it, probably, for the action sequences. And that's where they really put the majority of the noticeable 3D effort, the action sequences. And yeah, there were a couple of sequences that gave me nausea. I got a little nauseous on some of these moving action sequences, and that is a good sign of 3D, which brings us to the next question. Should you see The Last Jedi in IMAX? All right, so I should let you know, I saw it in IMAX. Was it worth it? I'd have to say yes, unless in your theater, in your town, the cost difference is huge. I have to give a caveat. Where I live, a Tuesday afternoon 3D IMAX movie is the equivalent is like $6, right? And it comes with free popcorn and a drink, right? So like it's nearly free for me. So it's a different thing. But I know like where a lot of my friends live and where my folks live, it's $20 to go see an IMAX 3D movie, right? So that's something to consider. So if the cost difference isn't huge for you, I think it's worth it. With a big screen, though, some of those action sequences might get too real for you. All right. Again, I saw IMAX 3D, and IMAX plus 3D was a definite win in terms of the space battles and lightsaber fights. Everything else, though, is probably mostly the same in 2D. You probably might not notice. All right, so here are reasons to not see the Star Wars Last Jedi movie in theaters, but to wait to see it at home. All right, so the first reason is probably cost. And not just the savings of the outrageous cost of tickets right now. So not just savings. Let's not forget that every time you spend money on a movie, you are helping fund the pockets of mega rich assholes that spend that money on sexually harassing women and children and getting away with it. You're probably funding Harvey Weinstein's legal fund, right? So, I mean, so for civic duty reasons, there's a point for skipping the theater. And that goes for any movie, right? Your money is literally funding monsters, right? So that goes for any movie, including this one. And the second reason to not see it in theaters is the length. It's an obnoxiously long movie, I gotta say. Every scene is entertaining, but that actually makes it worse. I eventually had to pee and didn't want to miss any of it. So there were several times I thought the movie was over and it just kept on going and going and going, and what I wouldn't have done for a pause button. By the last 30 minutes, I thought my bladder was going to explode all over everyone, to the point of hurting. You know that feeling. So when the movie did end, I almost yelled out, "Oh, finally." Like, I almost yelled that out loud. All right, because, God, it's so long. So maybe one of these days, the makers of Star Wars will learn that it is probably better to have future installments go straight to Netflix as a miniseries or a flat-out show. Seriously, they could have cut the movie up into several episodes, enough to make it a season. And I would have binge-watched it all in one night and got to pee and get snacks between every episode, right? So there's a lot to be said for a pause button, and you just don't get a pause button in the theater, and this movie is super, super, super long. Again, not that the movie had any boring parts, it was just painfully too long for the theater. So that being said, I did see it in IMAX 3D and enjoyed myself overall. So what are your thoughts in general? And if you have seen it, what are your thoughts for those who haven't seen it yet?